want to check,
We go to my
folks at home, can I get a thumbs up if you can see the screen as it should be screened? So seen. So you're, yep, lovely. Thank you very much. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Sarah and Steve. Thank you very much. And I will be waving at you.
Yes, apparently we've got a 5, we've got a 4, 3, 2, and 1. So we're ready to rock and roll. Shall I start off?
Yeah. Right.
Cool. All right. Hello. Yes, I'm Steve. Stephen White, formerly of ASE. After actually, can everyone hear me? All right. Back here. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yes, I worked at Archaeology South-East ASE for 11 years, and probably the highlight of my time at ASE was my involvement with this particular project. We're on. Well, let's go. Actually, go into the next thing, or there we go. Right. So I have got about 20 minutes to go through the background of the project and about 2,500 years of archaeology before I hand over to Sarah to talk about the amazing outreach that she's been doing with this project. So wish me luck. Right. So we first rocked up on site in the January of 2015. The blue trenches you can see on the plan behind me were the first trenches we did. The results of which led us to another phase of field work in 2016, further work in 2017, and then in the January of 2018, we ended up in a mitigation exercise that lasted for 18 months from the January of 2018 through to July of 2019. The post-excavation process began in July 2019 through COVID into the middle of 2020, and publication work began February in 2021. You may have read the Landmass article that came out of the Middle Iron Age settlement that was released November last year, I believe it was. So that's done. The monograph was also done before, well, drafted before I left ASE. Some idea about the site. So 7,000 square meters of archaeology. Just the on-site work was 80,000 person hours. On site, we had 70 different archaeologists at various times while we're still on site, 40 different specialists. In total, to date, I believe it's about 159 different people have been involved in this project, either through field work, through post-excavation work, admin support, all the other amazing work, outreach, all that sort of stuff that we've been doing. In terms of material culture, 1.75 tons UK, almost 2 tons if you're American. Lots of pottery, CBM, animal bone, glass. In fact, the post-medieval assemblage is the largest inn or tavern assemblage that's been found, and it's 16th century all the way through to the 19th century. So we have a really amazing material culture for that. We ran this in 11 different excavation areas. Anyone who's worked commercially would know that it might be nice to work north-south. Unfortunately, you have to follow the vagaries of the client's demands. So we started up north, went down south, went west, went north-west, which meant that the recording was really important. Single context recording was the only way of doing this site. And the only reason it got done at all was because we had an absolutely fantastic team who got us through everything. Over 7,000 contexts, some of which would be as small as the backfill of a stake hole, and some of which would be an entire levelling deposit across one part of the site. And 5 periods: Middle Iron Age, Roman, medieval, post-medieval, and modern. Right. Period 1 was the Middle Iron Age. We had an enclosure settlement. The surviving area of it was about 50 meters east-west, 60 meters north-south. Now, approximating that out based on the curvature, we could be looking at something about 3,000 square meters. We had 2 roundhouses in this first phase that you can see here. Again, approximating that out, we could be looking at 3, 4, maybe 5 within that space. However, that wouldn't leave a lot of space for other stuff. We had Middle Iron Age pottery from the features and from the enclosure ditch. So we're very, very, very happy with the dating of it. We had C14 dating as well. And what that indicated, we actually had about 4 phases of activity. First phase was about 200 BC. The last phase looks like it stretched a good 50 or 60 years, all the way from the middle of the 1st century BC into the 1st century AD. So we're looking at a long, drawn-out period of decline at the end. For more details on that, see the article. We also had some Roman stuff. Just one thing, though. Great big honking ditch. It's about 140 metres south of the London to Colchester Road. It's got an ankle breaker type slot at the bottom of it. While there is obviously some discussion about whether these are fortification or military type features, for this there's no real evidence of that. It's quite far back from the road, so perhaps indicating an easement, land boundaries, drainage. Very nice ditch. One of the nicer ones I've dug, but you know, it was just a ditch, sadly. We did have lots of nice Roman pottery out of it. We had CBM, so again, very happy with the dating. And also it doesn't really fit with the earlier and later material in terms of how the land uses work across site. Oh, I'm actually speeding through this. Right. We had about 3 phases of medieval activity on site. To the north of northeast corner, we had what we've identified as a manor house. You can see, I just realized I can't actually go over there and point to everyone in the room. B3 for those not in the room, which is in the middle picture there, is the footprint of the robber cut of the manor house. The only remains we had of it was that large bit of masonry you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. Yes, it's a lovely digital capture we've got of it. The top of that intact bit of masonry was 1 metre below the formation level of the natural. It was only, if we think the only reason it was actually left and not robbed out was because the natural had collapsed over the top of it. You can see the size of the robber cut for it. The inside of it is faced, so we're very much looking at some sort of basemented structure, and it is, you know, it is not a small feature. It was there's a, I think I've got photos. No, there's a lovely photograph of the section, which was one of the best drawn sections I've ever seen. It was immaculate. It was like lovely, nice and taut, and a really good section across it. Some evidence for silting up in the bottom of it, so it might have been open for a little while before it was backfilled. The backfill evidence for that feature is all 14th century. So we're looking at quite a, or 14th to 15th century. So we're looking at a manor house that's potentially established around 1200, and then by 1400 or so was gone. You can see we've got a coaxial field system below it. To the left-hand image there, you can see what looks like a routeway. So we think of the routeway running up to the building, and then to the south of it, you can see a number of fields. This is the period 3.2. So this is like the high point of the medieval activity. Prior to that, and 3.1, which is about 1050 to 1200, we had some like small features. We had the odd pit, we had the odd post hole. Didn't really have a huge amount of actual activity. And then the period after this, the entire field system shifts. We have these small agricultural sort of ditches that you can see at the very bottom of that middle image. The ones for the next period have all shifted about 90 degrees, fatter, broader, and a bit shallower. So we've got like quite different types of features emerging through the medieval period. This is what we think it is. The reconstruction here is of the Ashwise manor house, the manorial estate. And you can see here where we could reconstruct where the site is, on that we can see where it is the south of Whitechapel Road, the common ground, the boundary of the estate, and that path to Stepney. That path to Stepney is very important for later discussion, but I just want to highlight it now. So I've got 8 minutes here. It's fine. It's all fine. So this is the post-medieval period. This is where everything really explodes across site. Those purple, the purple archaeology you can see in the middle image there, that's just period 4.1, and there is more. There are more features, there is more material culture from this period than any other period across site. This is where we start to see the establishment of inns. We see like a realignment of the field systems again. You see boundaries shifting from being, boundaries being denoted by ditches to being denoted by post holes. So we've got evidence of fencing coming in. Northeast, or the north, I guess, in that central image there, you can see there's a number of masonry features. On the left, you can see that's an actual beer cellar. That's the first phase of activity with those 2 copper line pits at the base, which are the remains. If you've got a couple of remains of the metal things that go around barrels, I forget the name right now. The next phase of that there's a hoops. Thank you, hoops. Jane coming in with the win there. Oh, sorry, Sarah. It was Sarah coming in with the win. I do apologize. The next phase of that cellar, there's a brick floor established and a number of brick pads built up. And from what our buildings experts' opinion was, is that it was actually those are the things that would have been the braces for cross beams that you would put beer barrels on to store in a beer cellar. There's quite a few examples of this, and I just thought it was quite cool for an archaeologist to find a beer cellar as opposed to being stuck in one, you know. On the right-hand side of the image there, you can see the different phases of that I spoke about of this particular building. You can see the middle and bottom image on the right-hand side. You can see where that cellar has come in, and you can see some of the remains of the pads. This is the Red Lion. Well, it's known as the Messuage by the sign of the Red Lion in 16th century legal documents. More of them later. And let's say the evidence for this is very much moving towards that of a drinking establishment. We've got drinking vessels. We even have later periods. We have wine glasses, all sorts of stuff. So like really also gaming pieces, dominoes. So many clay tobacco pipes, some really interesting ones as well. And so we actually had some quite early ones. But the reason we were there, thank you. I thought you could be a high five then. No? Okay. The reason we were there, though, the reason the planning condition was put on was for the Red Lion Playhouse. There was believed to be a chance that we would find it. If you'd asked me in the January of 2018, when I had to stop all consultants from the Royal London Hospital from coming onto site to park their cars, I would not have said that we were going to find it. But I have to report that I was wrong. Now, the reason we know about the Red Lion was from a number of material. There's two lawsuits that mention it in particular. There are land deeds that, while they don't mention the playhouse, allow us to locate it in space because they refer to the Red Lion, or they refer to the road that we didn't identify the Red Lion based onto. We have got maps, so there's no maps of the 16th century. So there's no maps of 1567, but we can see a lot of these buildings on like the 16th and 17th and 18th century maps. The Red Lion is described as being within the court or yard lying on the south side of the garden belonging to the Messuage farmhouse, called and known by the same of the sign of the Red Lion. There it is. We're using the archaeology. We built the reconstruction. We built it using the stage, we're using the post holes for the outer walls, and then for the reconstruction, we, again, in consultation with our building specialists, looked at what would be the fixtures and fittings. Now, personally, I think the ones they use there, which are the ones from the rows, are perhaps not what I would have gone with, but yeah, because it's a much more simple structure. You know, it's a bit more spit and sawdust than that. Because what we need to think about this period is that when we talk about playing, we're not just talking about drama, we're talking about sports, we're talking about combat, we're talking about animal events. So yes, drama is part of it, but the understanding of a playhouse is a place of play. After the Red Lion, I'm really going to run through this. After the Red Lion continues, we have the Red Lion Messuage on the screen there on the right. We know that's Swan Farm. And then there's this building that appears called the White Raven. It's known as the Gardener's House, then as the White Lion, then becomes the White Raven. That is an incredibly important building because it's indicative of social and other sorts of changes going on within London that Sarah is going to address in her talk. I'll teach you up. After the Red Lion, continuing through the 19th century, you can see on the left, that's the archaeology. On the right, you can see the street plan of the 19th century. What's really interesting is we have the remains of the Fox Public House. What I particularly like is the line of cesspits and soakaways we had. We managed to identify them based off the property numbers. And so I managed to work out whose stuff I was looking at, which is pretty cool. So one of the things we want to look at later with this in terms of assemblages is how we got clearance assemblages. Can we tell if actually this is the crossover between households? Can we actually maybe interrogate this stuff and say, can we learn more about the demographics of the period during, with what we've got, comparing name evidence with archaeology? It's one of the things I haven't got round to yet, but it's one of the things we're going to be looking to do. Oh, yay, 2,500 years. Thank you. All right, and over to Sarah.
Thanks.
I might just quickly go back to that map, because if you see there's the terraced houses marked out in the red line, but just beneath where we've got Russell Street written underneath the Russell, you can see there's a PH there, public house. Yeah. And that's interesting as well as part of this story, because we weren't sure that what that public house was. So it's outside our site, and it speaks to the nature of archaeology that you deep dive in the site that you were at. So it didn't really strike us to look up what that one was, but that one by the 19th century was the White Raven. So I'll just scoop forward now, and I'm going to read because I'm not as clever as I've been. Yeah, no, I haven't. So, hello, I'm Sarah Wolferstan. I work in sort of the social value, public engagement bit of Archaeology South-East. So I'm not a proper archaeologist. I did do it for my degree. I did archaeology and anthropology 100 years ago, and I am a graduate of the Institute of Archaeology. I did cultural heritage studies at the same time as you probably were doing your PhD here, so it's nice to see your face. And I spent a lot of time sort of before and after my MA working in international development and climate change stuff in humanitarian sectors. And I did do a little stint at CAU at Cambridge Archaeological Unit, so I can kind of relate to it quite a lot what's going on. But I was wandering around doing stuff to do with European heritage standards at the Council of Europe about people power and heritage, bottom-up heritage. So that's what I've been trying to bring that experience to ASC in this last couple of years since I've been working more. And the project that I was given was this one to build outreach on. But I wasn't the first one to do outreach at this project. The title of this talk mentions radical experiments and liberation. That was really just to get you in the room. No, I joke. But in terms of outreach, the planning conditions were set quite a long time ago, and they covered public realm and placemaking. And that wasn't that radical, but it kind of fitted in with the time of what the conditions were like. And this is outside of the city as well. So that was actually quite a good result. But the stories that I'm going to tell you about, which are more towards the 18th century, they've emerged through talking to people about what they wanted to see for the engagement out of this project. I don't think we'd have come up with them on our own. So there was a great deal, as I said, made of the archaeology, and there was a really good, strong, supportive team from the developer who requested lots of monthly blogs, which I think Emily pictured here found quite hard to come up with monthly blogs. So that was a lesson learned. They were a little bit squeamish about bones, but largely they were supportive. They didn't sort of veto anything. They wanted to sort of control some of the marketing, so they didn't jeopardize their sales, which is fair enough, I suppose. That's their bag. But also it was a matter of timing. So this outreach was happening as soon as we got off site. And at that time, we hadn't done the post-excavation analysis. We had found the theatre. So some of the early outreach, it was multi-period, but of course, the big selling point was the playhouse. And, you could argue that there's quite a few playhouses that have been found in London, and that we need to sort of zoom out of playhouse land. Otherwise, we're going to get ourselves a reputation as archaeologists as only being interested in playhouses, which kind of also... Yeah, says Jane, fair enough. But it sort of also tiny bit speaks to the narrative of the golden age and exceptionalism of British culture. But it was good as an attention-grabbing headline. So what is a legacy? What is legacy from the outputs of archaeology? Well, I think this is something we legitimately ask ourselves as archaeology. And in the client strategy, which you'll see over there on the right, came out before we'd found, is that right, Steve? Before we'd actually located the theatre. So although the conditions were heavily look for the playhouse, we hadn't yet found it. So they went through lots of focus groups and decided to link the site to the Huguenots. Why did that do that? So it's called the Silk District now, even though this wasn't a silk area. I can point out the names, and again, that's kind of standard. We couldn't really tell them not to. I think Susanna tried, and I think there is a building named after the Red Line now. The other things that were set out in the conditions were public realm and hard landscaping. So some of those have been put into site. Some of them are still waiting to go in. You can see that monolith there, which has some interpretation of the theatre on it. It's not quite where the theatre was, but near enough. It's not quite the height of the stage either, is it, Steve? But near enough. So yeah. And there's also a metal surface that marks out the Iron Age ditch, although there's nothing telling you that that's an Iron Age ditch, but hopefully that's coming. And there was also Susanna put in made a real effort actually to get an archaeological heritage management plan that talks about these two spaces, also the bit of manor house wall that was moved across, I think, where you found it, and put into the margins of the site. So it's a bit confusing when you get there because you can't really read that. So ASC has produced a nice leaflet which you can download if you want to. It's also on that QR code, which explains a little bit of that hard landscaping. But, you know, what else? What about this massive tavern assemblage? Well, we were waiting for some bronzes, I think. They made a bronze to go out onto benches, but we haven't heard what's happened yet. That's a little bit overdue, of these cast objects on benches, which will hopefully tell a bit more of the story. But there's nothing really much talking about what was happening in Whitechapel on a wider level. So that was kind of the situation where I inherited the project. And we'd done a little thematic analysis about publics based on Susanna's heritage management plan and on themes. And the themes that we were given was 18th century, 17th, 18th, 19th century innovation, the relevance of taverns to the changing face of post-medieval London, entertainment, leisure, things like that, and multiculturalism, and the changing demographies of East London, especially given the importance of London's role within the empire. So, who have we got at our tavern? In order to set the scene for this a little bit, I thought I would indulge myself with showing you a bit of my take on the amateur history of this site, which is, luckily, we're really informed by a huge amount of writing and prints about 17th, 18th century London because of satirical cartoonists like Rowlands and Cruikshank. So these have got charming titles. The Lowest Life in London is that one on the left. Tom, Jerry and Logic among the unsophisticated sons and daughters of nature at Almack's in the east. And here we've got African Sally dancing a jig with an Irish coal merchant. And at the back, there's Black Sally having a smooch with somebody, and there's a little baby on somebody's knee. And, you know, this was a sort of a class comment rather than a race comment. I think that's really worth noting. And on the right here, we've got a bawdy house in Wapping, and you can see it's a lovely multicultural mix of the low life of Britain. So these were our taverns, and you can sort of see how, well, I think I read somewhere that there were 1 in 5 women were sex workers in the 18th century. I think this was Dan Cruikshank's, and the size of the economy nearly matched the size of the economy of trade from the ports. So yeah. I'd quite like if you found something that related to that actually coming out of it. But of course, being Black and being British, well, being the word Black, historically, it was a big, wide sleeve term. It's not just people of African descent, it's also people of Asian descent. As you can imagine, our colonies weren't just in Africa, they're also in Asia. So there's been a lot of publications in the last few years about this topic, and it wasn't just in the full age of empire and the Atlantic economy and slavery, in which we have Black people rocking up in London. There's a really good book by Miranda Kaufman has been published. She's at the University of London as well. And this is the sort of things that people have been telling me to read as I've been engaging with them. So I've been reading them. And these 2 books over here, they do a big span of history and talk a lot about archaeology, actually. It's historians talking about archaeology. I really like this quote. History isn't a solid set of facts. It's very much about what questions you ask of the past. If you ask different questions, you get different answers. People weren't asking the questions about diversity, and now they are. That's Miranda, who wrote that quote about her research on Black Tudors. She's changing a few preconceptions there. There's a lot of work been done specifically by this lady here on Black England. She's American, actually, so it took an American historian to say, why aren't you guys talking about the amazing Black people who were part of the 18th century scene? During the 1700s, the population of London doubled, reaching 1 million by the end of the century. This rise is inseparable from our place as the colonial capital of Britain. By the mid-18th century, contemporaries have estimated that London's Black and Asian population numbered between 10 and 20,000 people. So that's about 1 in 50 by the middle of the century. After the American War of Independence, a new group arrived. These were the Black Loyalists. So they were soldiers who were of African descent who had accepted Lord Dunmore's offer of freedom to fight for the Brits rather than the rebels/patriots during the American Revolutionary War. So apparently there was about 10,000 people who took him up on this offer. They weren't offering British people who were on those sides of the Brits freedom, just the people who were on the American side. And so when that worked out to our disadvantage, that a particular set of battles, these people were faced with potentially being re-enslaved. So many went to Nova Scotia, about 3,000, where they spent quite a long time waiting for land and pensions that had been promised them. And about 1,000 sought refuge here in London. So that was quite a up from the numbers, and also people who were injured, people who had been soldiers, people had a lot of expectations that they had not been met. So this led to the establishment in 1786 of the so-called London Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor. And this committee set itself up to help this visibly, noticeably bigger group of people on the streets of East London and West London, actually. And they provided help, clothes, medicine, work, and money in several locations, one of which was the White Raven. This soon turned into a longer and more controversial plan for a new colony in Sierra Leone. Again, the term Black Poor here encompasses other groups, including white beggars and prostitutes, many of whom ended up in Sierra Leone in 1787, leaving from London. And it wasn't a good experiment. Although the Black loyalists from Nova Scotia arrived in the 1790s and the colony took off. So although the link between archaeology and the Sierra Leone resettlement project was our sort of starting point, the feedback from all the community historians has made it clear that it's more of a longer term picture that they're interested in, of the culture of care, of support, of resilience and aliveness. And these taverns were the setting for that. So Whitechapel was an early centre for Black culture, which is why they picked the White Raven as their tavern in 1786. This 1786 newspaper article refers to weekly balls taking place at the White Raven. We know that these communities will have sought each other out for help, and there's hundreds of people seeking their liberation in London during these decades. And there's no doubt that this is happening also in our tavern. Another contemporary newspaper article tells us about, in the same year, a sheriff tried to arrest a John Pegg at the White Raven. He was a so-called Black corporal, so he was administering this aid on behalf of the committee. But 100 Black men came to his rescue and prevented the arrest. So there were lots of Black people in Whitechapel in the mid-18th century. I really recommend this book, by the way, if you can. So according to Steve and our senior find specialist, Elka, these are her slides, there are very few published assemblages of this size and time span in London, if not the UK, actually. We didn't have a huge number of finds linked to the 16th century stage. We had pins, lace, shapes, and buckles, but mainly this is 1700s and 1800s tavern assemblage. Now, our community historians, when we got in touch with them through the local archive in London Borough Tower Hamlets, they were super fascinated by this story, but what they wanted to hear about was the archaeology of colonialism. So I scratched my head a little bit and tried to work out what that was. As I said, I'm not a proper archaeologist. So I had a think, and I tried to think what the archaeology of colonialism in London might want to focus on. Well, we do have a few exotic goods on our site, but not that many. I think that's also quite common the further you get from the river or fine houses. But we do have evidence of ivory working, of fans, of combs, needle cases, and cutlery handles. The majority of our evidence is in that larger category of imported goods or receptacles for imported goods like the pipes. And these are related to the consumption and processing of colonial goods like tobacco and sugar, all of which are really inseparable from this topic. They're also very linked to changing consumption patterns and our cultural norms. They point to some of the ways that this boom of wealth that was caused by colonialism was consumed and invested in a large section of London society. So we recovered, as Steve said, a lot of clay pipes, over 60 kilograms. And these dated from the 16th to the 19th century, especially 1680 to 1710. And many of them were made locally by the Manby family, for those of you who are ceramic clay pipe specialists. There were over 1,000 registered finds, and most of them were drinking vessels and bottles from the 17th and 18th centuries. But we've also got evidence of tea drinking and coffee drinking. And Elka writes that this fits Bragdon's model of taverns and Pierce's Uxbridge Inn study, with glass and pottery suggesting inns that were active on our side in this period. There was the cellar that we've seen, and that yielded a corkscrew, which we haven't got a picture of here actually, because we had to scan it to see it. Barrel taps, here we've got a really good one, and key handles as well. Lockable and unlockable barrels, basically, dating to the 18th century. The site was continuously built. I think as you've seen in that 4.1 period picture. And I quite like the fact that we've got this pencil that was probably used by a carpenter and found in a fence post hole, I believe. How am I doing? Oh, okay. We've got all the gaming finds. There's the domino, and that's a cockshine. We've got all these lovely glasses as well. And that's the bowling ball that we found. That's of Caribbean wood. So we've got a bit of exotic wood there as well. Where did you find that one? I can't remember. In a ditch. Back of a pit next to the bowling green. So you've seen on that John Ruck map that we had bowling greens. We also had market gardens, we had pleasure gardens, there were ponds. So it was a kind of little microcosm of 18th century Georgian life. So you saw that lovely stoneware gourd. That's got a royalist medallion on it, and that's on display in our exhibition as well. We've also got lots of evidence of sugar refining, not lots, but more than you would consider, thinking that we actually don't have any sugar refining activities on site. We've got about 20 bits of sugar molds, because all around Whitechapel, there were these massive sugar refining factories before it all got sort of specialized off into the East India docks. So that has been really important to some of the communities that we've talked to, and may have sort of elevated it more than we would have otherwise thought of, because they were interested. So sugar was consumed by all classes: tea, coffee, sugar, all these sugary things, toothbrushes. There we go. Sugar was a bit of a public health concern at the time, and there are lots of dentists apparently in Georgian London. We've also got this rather funky flea trap over here on the right, which points to sanitary conditions at the time, and music. It's a jaw harp and a French horn mouthpiece over there on the left. So what do we do with this initial engagement with people about this site? We thought we were telling the story of the White Raven, and it turned out we were actually telling a story of the multicultural London, which was actually, to be fair, one of the things we thought it might lead to. I decided, because I've come across storytellers in other projects, I've decided to use a storyteller, a London-based storyteller, to sort of, in that early phase of R&D, to tell us about how storytelling might help and reinforce some of these discussions that we were having, because we were very keen to not sort of use a very standard one-way out approach to the engagement. It wasn't outreach, it's definitely engagement. We wanted to be preferably co-designed engagement, because we just didn't want to be a university and a load of archaeologists telling this story alone. We also wanted it to be really creative. So we got in touch with Alim Kamara, who was amazing, and an Institute of Archaeology alumni called Mercedes Baptiste Halliday, and we took them on tours of site. We showed them the objects. This is before we come up with the plan for the exhibition and said, what should we do? And we ended up getting a few odds and ends of UCL funding to do this, some involving students and staff, and we did a storytelling workshop. And basically that then sort of spun into the desire and the need to do more joined up research with the archives. So that was to kind of get through this top layer of this iceberg of this is from a futurist study about how in futurism people tend to do quite a linear analysis of problems, whereas this is more trying to get down beneath what's the core of this. And it's quite nice because it's quite stratigraphic as well, to get beneath the litany, to get beneath this and try to think about how what's lying beneath our assumptions might be informing the way we write our narratives. So I thought the storytelling approach was a good one for that. Just information, and we kind of have them there just to look like we were doing it the right way. We wanted to do it the right way. So we did an archive workshop with the London Borough Tower Hamlets and paid for some of the community participants to come along. And Steve did a nice walk around the site. And that's kind of, that research unpicked some of these problems as to where the White Raven was. I should explain, because we discovered that they had been looking for the White Raven for over 20 years. And they had found it. They thought they had found it. They were pretty sure that it was under the Whitechapel mission, which is on the Whitechapel Road. And it was quite hard for us to be confronted with that because we were pretty sure it wasn't, but we didn't want to just say you're wrong. And we wanted to find out why that they had come up with that plan. They had run meetings there for a group of Health Through History. They had written a publication about prominent 18th century Black activists and Black writers who were seeking their freedom. So we had, and they actually, lots of Tower Hamlets publications still have this location as the White Raven. So we did a bit more archive research, 2 minutes, and together we found out that actually that in that 19th century map you saw that was a PH there. That's this image here in black and white that came. It was one of our community historians and the archivist who found it and located it. They talked to the Salvation Army, who had this print in their archive because they had done meetings in the Skittle Alley next to it. So it's interesting that the White Raven, who was just across the road from our site, still had a Skittle Alley. But we had this progression of taverns that were going west across our site. And clearly, probably it wasn't on site by the time of those meetings. But the biggest story is that this was where Black people were collecting and to support each other. And they accepted that narrative. It also helped that we went into the updated survey of London and found that under the Whitechapel mission, which is a 1970s building, there was a 1740s coal yard, a coal merchant that owned that site for 60 years. So that kind of helped as well. And that wasn't our research, but it kind of smoothed things over. So at that point, we managed to get some support from the Culture Lab to put on an exhibition. It's very small, but it's on there for this year. And the Culture Lab is a space in UCL East that's trying to really push UCL into new spaces. And there's some Olympic Borough money for that as well. So we've put on this lovely exhibition. It was co-curated with Mercedes, who has been part of our collective from the beginning. And Alim came back and did a poem for us, which I'll show you in a second. We wrote this article as well for British Archaeology. And I just wanted to share you Mercedes' impressions of what it was like to be part of this early phase of the project.
I've been working in the area for several years, and I actually ran like an archiving sort of project for a local school. And when I was like researching and prepping for the project, I did look at the history of Whitechapel, and I was particularly interested in the histories of Black and brown people, but I didn't see anything in reference to the White Raven. And so I think that just goes to show how unknown it is as a history, and I've never kind of spoken to anyone about it before. It's very strange because I probably would have walked past this site weekly, and I think that just speaks to the incredible nature of archaeology, is that we interact with the landscape and we're not always fully aware of it, but once we become aware of it, you feel like we're part of the landscape in a way. I think it has changed my opinion of developers, and I think it's a great example of how actually developer-led archaeology can work, and it can do good, and it can have kind of a community output to it. And I would love to do more work around this.
Next one. Who's our storyteller?
It's about reclaiming narrative and ensuring that our stories are told authentically. So for me, it's personal. My ears perk up when I hear Sierra Leone because it's not a story often told, let alone a country people have heard of. So this is about honouring heritage, celebrating history and culture that shaped me. I was also happy to know that there are links being discovered and that they're not being hidden or sugar-coated. The story also confronts the dark chapters of history, which might invoke feelings of empathy, reflection, or discomfort. Ultimately, I believe it will encourage audiences to appreciate the complexities of our shared past and inspire meaningful conversations. My knowledge of archaeology is now beyond just picture books and museum glass windows. The same way oral storytellers must piece together stories, archaeologists do the same, connect the dots. I got to touch real pieces that were discovered, from pipes to cutlery, without the initiative to consider what lies beneath. All could have been lost. all could have been lost, you know.
I did mention that his parents are from Sierra Leone, didn't I? Yeah, his parents are from Sierra Leone, but he's a Londoner. So yes, these were some of the things that we were trying to reflect on when we were thinking about post-med and social value. It's really important to build in from as early as possible engagement with people who have descended from these experiences of colonialism and enslavement, especially if we are trying to create equal opportunities and access to archaeology, if we're trying to not re-traumatize. This is where we've been really in dialogue with talking about aliveness and liberation rather than just memorializing one episode, which was quite a negative one. And we are called to do this basically by the London Research Framework, to connect history, to connect our assemblages with the lives of people in the past of all social strata in the post-medieval period. And back to my original question, how does one do archaeology of colonialism? Please send it to me. I haven't found a lot about how to do this type of archaeology, let alone this type of engagement. And this is a conversation that we've had a lot. How can we radically change this way of talking about those assemblages, not only the exotic assemblages, but also the everyday lives of these people who have come from colonial periods that are part of all of us. This isn't just them, a Black history. This is our history. So I'm really asking for your help about how we can do that. Before we finish, Alim's poem, if you'll indulge me one more time.
For us, the ocean is a cemetery. And if you look carefully, you can still see the names engraved on tombstones made out of waves. Or are they liquefied arms, reaching to grab onto shores only to be ripped back to the epic Egypt? Science says the DNA of Blacks, Nubians, captives, humans are still planted in the dwellings of the transatlantic. Decor dark, aquatic blue, salt, jade, green, prey, the light, nothing. We boarded an ark for resettlement to avoid the storms of England. We, the Black folk, were tired of the coasting, verbal stones and cruelty unfit even for a sinner. The way was risky, but anything is better than the torment we endure. So we took our chances with the tide, migrating only to be diluted by politics, rape, clans, religion, tribalism, land, and other. You must not forget us. Surely they cannot just erase their immorality. Yes, you must tell us. We will leave you clues of our existence and carnage in dusty diaries, bones, Whitechapel, Portsmouth, and guilt. We will scream from the depths of the sea. Since our tongues were stolen, our language will surface in the form of methane bubbles. Make no mistake and question when the number of cargo humans are less upon reaching the destination. One day, other words will be given for this offer. Deportation, relocation, overpopulation, dual citizen, recruits, workers. But now, it is libre, Latin, liberty, Old French, liberty, English, freedom, capital, Freetown, Sierra Leone.
That gives me the shivers. So we're now at this stage of just trying to turn another corner, and we really want to do that, with the archaeological community. The London archaeologist Egan and Jeffreys, who are very keen on post-medieval archaeology, argue that we must reveal London's role as an imperial capital. And we need to write these colonial connections in. We have to evidence the violence that's behind some of these things. But it's not an either or. We can also celebrate some of the achievements at the same time. So I hope that you can, hopefully in your questions, you'll give me some ideas and tips and send me some articles that you think might be useful. I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you. It is an astonishing sight, the work that's been done to bring those stories in such a different and such a meaningful way is quite incredible. So do visit the exhibition if you can and look at some of the online content. So I will do magic things over here, and in the meantime, do we have questions in the room, please? Richard.
Thanks, that's really great. Really interesting to hear about the engagement. So, do you kind of set yourself some like performance metrics or something like that in terms of like, you know, what success looks like for the engagement piece? And maybe you could just say a little bit about what those were.
Definitely. Well, actually, as a unit, as a company, we have a sort of evaluation strategy it's based on a theory of change, which hasn't been formally adopted, but I wrote it, so I get to use it. So in the theory of change, it's along the lines of outcomes for the heritage, outcomes for people, outcomes for the community, which you may recognise and we drill that down into how different archaeological projects might be tailored to that particular outcome, and that's our generic framework. And we didn't create one at the start of our outreach and engagement for this project back in 2020, because that was all this is all quite new, some of this stuff that's come through. I mean, it's sort of working its way through the glass guidelines and stuff. But we did do that when we started applying for these funds, partly because UCL East, which funded us the first time, asked for outcomes. And the second lot of funding we got was a grand challenges for cultural understanding. So that was about decolonizing the curriculum. So they were very good. There were small pots of money, but they were quite good at saying this is about R&D, this is about risk taking. So they asked us to identify potential short, medium, and long-term outcomes, but they couldn't actually. So we are tracking those, and we've built in those outcomes and monitoring and evaluating those outcomes in the feedback that we get from people along the way. Like that's why we videoed Alim and Mercedes right at the beginning. We haven't had to collate that yet, and what we have done is drafted, because we're a higher education institute, and some of you might be aware that Cambridge did very well with Must Farm in the last round of Research Excellence Framework. All higher education institutes must submit case studies, and previously the IOA didn't count Archaeology South-East as its group of staff. Oh, but Cambridge has done well with Must Farm. Maybe we should look at it. It's been a bit of a changing vibe in the Institute of Archaeology. We've had change of directors here. We've had change of directors at ASC. So there's been a little bit of a coming together and a kind of, should this be a case study? It's hard to do with like very little cash to do, and also not yet having researchers that are interested in engagement, but I might have found some people who might be more interested in that aspect, because we're trying to partner all the time with researchers. We're technical staff, so there's only so much that we can do to sort of build in. But yes, we're really, really keen on capturing outcomes and impact. So what change does this bring to people? And of course, it's about changing narratives of London in the 16th, the long 18th century. But in a way that doesn't kind of privilege one story over the others, but allows stories to emerge. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Gally.
Just building upon that, and also have a question. What if you engaged with master's students as part of the dissertation project, and you could potentially capture the impact and collect evidence, but actually on an annual basis?
Yeah.
You can actually.
Yes, sign them up. Yes, please. I've tried to create relationships.
My students, if you want.
Well, I had a good result. I got approached by the digital humanities team, then masters, MA, MSc students who wanted to do placements, but and I presented to them at a time which they could have potentially go on to dissertations with us. I've also been approached by public history recently. I've had to sort of poke people to be approached. It wasn't as straightforward as that. Again, it's like the public history, for example, they wanted to do a placement with us. It was quite a complex placement. Some of their outputs have been like briefs for documentary makers or online exhibitions, and I can't supervise that on my own. I haven't got the time or resources to do that. But it's finding those, we should be like a satellite of people helping this happen. It can't just be me and occasionally Steve in his spare time. Steve has actually come here in his free spare time. He doesn't, he's not even at ASE anymore. So it's finding ways of just slightly elevating that and making a truly joined up project. And you're right, MAs could help us get there. Maybe we're going to have a PhD student who's at the back of the room. That would be even better.
Question was, as you mentioned, this is a shared history, so it's not just relevant to the
Nation, no.
But it's really very much a shared history. And I'm wondering to what extent, I mean, obviously this is based on very small funding, but have you done or do you plan to do more like wider engagement with the wider community beyond?
Oh, yeah, well, we'd love to.
At least starting from the local basis, obviously, because you start from somewhere. But I think that would be exceptionally important and interesting.
So yeah, the very first people we contacted were the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Archive and Heritage Services. And it just so happened that they're doing a project called the Communities of Liberation, which is highlighting the names of people who on baptismal registers, marriage, people who have sought their liberation because it was a common belief that if you were Christian and had godparents and were registered and you couldn't be re-trafficked. It wasn't always true, but it was a good attempt. And sometimes your godfathers or godparents did save you, literally, like getting you off a ship. So that's brought lots of names to light. Anyway, they are going for potentially the same sources of funding as us. I think that's what they perceived. And I was kind of like, help, please help here, have an assemblage. But I don't think they really got what mind you, I'm meeting with one of them tomorrow after about a year and a half of trying. So, and actually they facilitated archive work with us, but I think there's been a little bit of kind of universities and archaeology don't necessarily have a very good rap with some of these archive services and local councils. They didn't know about the dig. And that's how planning works is somehow like bizarre, isn't it? They didn't know we were there, even though we were literally around the corner from them. And they've got a bit defensive. They're like, well, why didn't we know about it? Yeah.
Similar to the last question, but are there any efforts to publish the research data outside of academic journals and so on? If so, how are you kind of making that more digestible to archaeologists, non-academic people? Is that something that's...
Yes, it's very much so the monograph should be coming out in the next year, although they've been telling me that for 2.5 years. But I think there's a real effort now to push it through the finish line because Steve's drafted it, but all the specialist reports are in, and there's a bit of shaping going on and working out which bits of it can be put towards the back of the monograph. All the valid, very hard work, but not as accessible, maybe. That's one. I don't know if that's going to happen. I've also been seeking funds for doing zines and cartoons that work collaboratively with young people. But again, it's hard to find. You either have to go for a big lottery project or you have to go for smaller tranches of funding. And if anybody has some smaller tranches of funding, I tried with COLAT and they said that the output wasn't archaeological enough. And I get it, it's a competitive fund, but in that space of trying to do different outputs, it would be great to have more resources because you can't magic it out of thin air. The funding for this is overspent massively. So it's what time I can put into it and I can't, do it all.
I mean, in terms of the archaeological publication, there was a concerted effort to
get publications out. Yeah.
Also make it accessible as well. So there's bits in it where we've punched it up to try and make it just open and readable, and almost like there are bits of it you could take out and extract. You go, here's a digestible bit of why this is interesting, what's going on here. But again, that a lot as this stuff was really emerging quite late in the publication process. And also, I mean, to my mind, this stuff is so important. I think it needs its own work, which I mean, Sarah had an article published earlier this year, which is really, really good. But I do think there's scope for doing more with that. Yeah, and I think that's the thing is that with this sort of stuff, I think it's so important. It needs more.
Yeah,
And
we're not going to, I don't think we could publish just the engagement on its own, but we now need to go through, well, we have already talked, we've done two popular articles, one London Archaeology that came out quite recently, one CBA, and happy to, you know, people want to publish this story in other ways because it keeps evolving. But in terms of how we then go back to the monograph and maybe think about how to frame it differently, that's still very much up in the air. And I think people are, you know, keen to think about how that should be done, looking at other examples as well as how it might be done. If you know of them, please send them to us. I think we've got our own ideas. But
you looked at funding perhaps from the local communities themselves in certain areas, councils and so on. Is that something that might interest them and they might?
Yeah, I think it's partly because this particular community is keen on owning that space. And they've also, apparently they've just been turned down for a large lottery project, which included a public art project. They want to put Black people back on the map of Tower Hamlets, and they didn't get the funding for that. If they'd done it in partnership with me, that could have been nice, couldn't it? But maybe they will now. Maybe that's why I'm meeting with them tomorrow. It's hard to know. It's really quite difficult to have these relationships because everyone's a little bit kind of like sizing each other up. But there isn't much money to be had, really. That's the thing.
Yeah, I'm interested. I just want to turn it around the other way. Archaeologists sort of get parachuted into a site. Oh, you're going to do this site. You turn up and you dig. And actually, the people around you live there and may have had family connections for many, many years. And they know far more about the bumps and lumps in the ground than you do. And yes, you dig up stuff, then you can tell them. How do you engage with them? Because that's a question that's not just relevant to what you're talking about.
Very good question.
Who goes anywhere should talk to locals.
Well, in theory, that is a wonderful idea, and I completely agree. However, these sorts of projects are at the behest of the developer, and ultimately, if the developer tells you that they do not want to talk about it, they can pull you off the job and put someone else on it who will abide by their rules. So, while I mean, these developer was very, very friendly, was very helpful, but they had cleared. I mean, Sarah talked about the bones earlier. We had some amazing baiting dog assemblages. We had like intact skeletons that were fascinating. We weren't allowed to put them on the website because they didn't want anyone to think they'd been killing animals where people were going to buy their houses. Which is, I mean, it's their point of view, it's their business, it's their money.
They're paying, but they're not the owners of that
story.
No, they're not. But and I completely agree. As soon as we could talk about stuff, we did. But this is a very constrained environment, developer-funded archaeology. You know, it's now my thing that I really enjoy doing is going and talking to people, talking to local residents, discussing the landscape, discussing their contextual understanding of where they live. But a lot of times we can't. So what I try and do is make sure we do have engagement built in. Like, you know, I mean, with this site, part of the reason there was a planning condition was that a local resident who was an archaeologist went, I think the red line's supposed to be there. And that highlighted it to Tower Hamlets. So there, but you know, also though, with some of these projects, as you know, a large, massive excavation, you might not actually know what you're digging until you get to the post-excavation phase. You'll have some idea of what you've got, but the flavour and the contextual understanding you simply don't have. So there is also a danger if you engage with a port you don't understand what you've got, you're potentially feeding disinformation. And we want to be as honest and open and upfront as we can do within a very constrained environment, if that makes any sense.
So a campaign of guerrilla plaques.
Oh, I'm here for it. Post-it notes, everything, just put them up. Thank you.
You did have the hoarding up on site and it did say what was going on, and there was a planning, a planning application that you could interrogate. I would agree with you that that's not necessarily working. So we had there was no archaeological condition saying we were going to do any outreach or engagement during excavation. So we're then bound by that. We signed an agreement with the developer, was subcontracted by the archaeological consultancy. And she was great, actually, Susanna. She wrote this archaeological heritage management plan. She went and talked to everybody around. So that's already a lot more than quite a lot of sites. But again, this was 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. It's been a long, slow build up, and maybe it will be different now.
I mean, the DBO was written in 2013. So, and we started site. I mean, I turned up on site in January of 2015 at about 6 a.m. So, like, this has been a long form project. But I do think stuff has changed. Like, public benefit, public outreach is very much embedded in stuff from day one now. And actually, see it in planning conditions. They'll say there'll be a level of outreach with this. So when you've got that, it's also part of the tender you put together. You say, we'll do this amount, we can do this much outreach, we can do this much. But again, it then comes down a certain amount to funding.
It's about trying to get that early, so
Mm.
you're informed when you dig or when you
Yeah.
structure your
Definitely.
calculation, as well as informing what the building's going to be.
Although the number of times I've been told by local residents, oh, there's tunnels under there. But yes, early engagement is the best thing you can do. I totally agree.
Right. Oh, Vanessa.
Sorry, I just had a question more about the long history of a site like this and about how we can engage. You've talked a lot about post-medieval and people who see themselves having a link with the community that lived there in the post-medieval period. But can we get those same people be interested in place and the history of place and what's gone on the sites they now live in, even though those will not be people that they feel an identification with?
I'm a bit confused. The people that they did feel tied to place.
I mean, if you're talking about engaging with a black or wider community of background, who can see their ancestors on the ground in the 18th century, 19th century, are there ways in which we can take that understanding and sense of belonging back into an earlier period, even though the occupants there are not part of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, for example, I'm obsessed with archaeology, and I don't have any. I think you have to get them hooked, and it's what is the hook, and it sometimes isn't what you expect. So we were thinking, is the Sierra Leone story our hook? But actually, they were like, we've been here for 400-500 years, and holding up Miranda Kaufman's book to me. And Britain is a multicultural, radical space. It's so cool. That was the hook, rather than agriculture has changed in Whitechapel over the last 1,000 years.
It did, though.
It did, but that wasn't that. That it's offering a myriad of hooks, but it's tailoring it to that and every audience. Even you will have your different audiences. One of you will a different taste. One of you is going to be interested in one period or one type of object. So it's trying to find lots of different ways of getting in, also going to people rather than expecting them to come to us. We're having trouble getting people into the culture lab, for example, because it's a bit out of the way. So we're trying to think of new ways of getting people in the door, but also going out. We've got a lovely box of finds that didn't make it into the exhibition, and I want to take it to people and say, hey, look at this. There's some really good finds from this site. What I don't want to happen is that they all just get put in a box because they're not good enough to go into the Museum of London. We've got millions of things like that. Shouldn't we find ways of using these objects in other more creative? Obviously, yes, we all agree, but it's very hard to find that place, that person, that way of making it happen. Museum of London Museum. Yeah, they're in a busy patch right now. And as I said, our objects aren't sort of stand out.
They did a program. They had all this stuff, that thousands of examples, and they just gave them to schools. So here's a piece of road.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you do your pipes? And must have seen.
I've been in touch with them. If they would like to reply to me, I'm happy to collaborate. I keep going though. I've been in touch as well with slightly different groups as well, like the Black Cultural Archive, other sort of groups that are working with cultural and creative industries, so that we're not just kind of always going in our track. We're trying to do a performance project with Calliope at the front here, and I forgot your name. And Tina, thank you, Tina. So that we can tell, we've made a link with somebody who does hip hop theatre at Sadler's Wells, and he wants to do the new Hamilton based on 18th century Whitechapel. Wouldn't that be great? So, and I say, but yeah, you're going to find a way of archaeology being part of your story. He's like, yeah, I can see it. There's going to be stratigraphy on the stage, and your objects are going to be in the the stage. The Dubry, whatever it's called. What do I mean? The cast, the pamphlet that you buy. So like it depends on people having a particular vision, I think, to sort of popularize these things as well. And and also us being brave and talking to people that we don't normally talk to as well, which I'm quite happy to be brave and Larry.
On the developer side of things, is there a level of sort of positive marketing that the developer gains value from it?
You would have thought, but again, we do point, we write to their CSR people, we write to their social value leads, and there's a little bit of, oh, don't talk to them because you have to talk to 15 people before you talk to them. And also we're talking to Historic England about certain, there was an idea that was apparently had Section 106 money behind it. I'm not sure if it was written into a condition because I haven't seen them, about doing a performance at the site to celebrate all of the, this playhouse and history of the site, but we haven't managed to sort of pinpoint who's in control of that budget, who was the person who promised it. Who would be great if we could figure that out, because it's got a ready-made theatre. Apparently it's outdoors, but they put budgeted and they may have built temporary seating. Was that part of the deal? I seem to remember Susanna Parker talking about temporary seating, but it might have been on a wish list. It's very hard to figure out where these things are and if they actually happened. But it would be fab, wouldn't it? And apparently the London Borough Tower Hamlets was quite keen on linking with other Tower Hamlets, theatres, playhouses, and sort of snubbing Southwark a little bit. So there was a bit of competition between, the playhouse history of London they were trying to take advantage of. So just need to be able to draw on those threads together. And unfortunately, the longer that time goes by, the more you kind of lose those threads.
With the excess, I'm not sure how the analysis would work with the excess of finds that you have. Is there a way of the developers could potentially present them in the building, a little bit like we have out in the corridor there? And that would obviously be quite an interesting component of it.
Yeah, that would be grand. That'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? When we did a Festival of Archaeology event in July, I asked the people who managed the building to email everybody in the building to let them know that we were doing a walking tour with that little flyer. I've got some copies of it in my bag. Would they like to join me and Steve? And nobody came. Did they send the email? I wasn't allowed, I didn't send the email. But we didn't, I gave them little posters.
I mean, also the developer has
Zero interest.
sold all the units and has no one got a presence on site.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I emailed
This
LNQ.
is part of the problem, because when the developer completes a scheme, they walk away. You need then to target the operator, and it's why it's so interesting and so rare that at a site like Vine Street Roman Wall, the operator is also the developer, and that's why there's been such a positive engagement there. And so, unfortunately, you need to make the relationships again and again and again. Because if the developer's just there to build a building, then that's it. After that, there's no.
And LNQ Housing runs the buildings, but they don't run the public space. So it's like, they're new. They've just been brought on, the people who run the public space. So then public space, because it's not public, obviously. So there are lots of.
Such a historic area.
I'm just going to ask about the. I was interested in the roundhouses that you mentioned, and is this? I know appreciate the limited, availability to excavate in the area. Would these be a settlement, or is it just are they just isolated? I don't know if there's been a lot of.
So we think so. They've got a ditch around the outside of it. We think it's enclosed familial group settlements, maybe 2 or 3 families. If you look at like the wider London area now, there's actually quite a lot of Middle Iron Age archaeology has been found. You've obviously got Uphall Camp, you've got stuff in Woolwich, you've got Barn Elms. Yeah, Barn Elms. Plus, there's small bits of Iron Age archaeology dotted about in Hammersmith and other places like that. So Bermondsey Abbey, of course. Yeah. So we're actually looking at quite a wide prehistoric landscape. Now, one of the things I think I say in the article is that, it kind of looks like what we've got is like large central hubs, maybe for production, metalworking, that sort of stuff, with smaller farmsteads dotted around the landscape. And so this is, on its own, the pottery and the roundhouses, they're nice, but what makes it interesting is part of that wider area, wider discussion, wide narrative. Actually, we're looking at a whole landscape of this stuff that just up until the last 10, 15 years, we hadn't dug it. So it's quite interesting in terms of settlement across the region.
People were amazed that there was Iron Age stuff in Whitechapel, like preservation wise, but also just the location, weren't they? They were just not expecting, you know, they were skeptical that it would be there.
Yeah, it was quite unexpected when we started. I was like, that's a roundhouse. Oh,
Not a playhouse.
no, not yet.
Too small.
That was 1500 years later.
Brilliant. I'm going to draw the proceedings to a close. We have no more questions. There was quite a lot of where's the exhibition? Anyway, someone found it and put it in the
Thank you.
so everyone's
That's the
seen it.
lab.
But there was also much, you must tell everyone where it is. So
Sorry.
that's all done. Now, Richard, maybe we could get it on our website. We could get a link to the exhibition. That would be very good.
And of course, to come. And if you want to have an organised thing for all of Lamas to come, then
We could do that as a late next year. That would be very good.
that would be brilliant.
That would be excellent. So can we thank Sarah and Steve again, please, for a top lecture
Thanks.
discussion.